New organized crime research shows that Kenya still provides an exit point for Africans being exploited abroad. Migrant workers, lured by prospects of jobs in the Middle East, are instead being trafficked into forced labor and modern-day slavery by organized criminal networks. That's according to research into human trafficking and smuggling by ENACT Organized Crime Program. To unpack these trends, we're joined by Lucia Bird, a Senior Analyst at Global Initiative, and Mohamed Daghar, a researcher within ENACT Africa. Maybe let me begin with you, Mohamed, and talk a little bit about this research. What exactly have you been able to find about the trends of human trafficking?
Thank you very much, Cathy, for having us at Newzroom Afrika. I think what is coming out very, very clearly is that there is actually human trafficking happening in Kenya and in East Africa in general, mainly to Middle Eastern countries. And this has been taking shape of late, and it's really happening and showing itself very lively with the COVID-19 situation. Kenya has been an exit point, not only for Kenyans, but for East Africans in general. And what we see that this is a latent form of human trafficking crime that mainly targets workers, mainly unskilled workers, in the form of labor exploitation.
Lucia, speak to me about the difference between human trafficking and human smuggling.
This is a poorly understood difference, and the two are often confused. However, when we're talking about human smuggling, we're talking about a contract for services where the smuggler helps the migrant move across national borders. With trafficking, we're talking about the exploitation of people, for example, in context of labor or sexual exploitation. And there is no consent there to that exploitation, or if there is consent, it was obtained through coercion or deception.
Are there different circumstances you find that often lead to the two? So the context under which perhaps somebody who's being smuggled out of a country versus one who's being trafficked out of a country?
So the context can start off the same, and a journey that starts off as smuggling could end up as trafficking. However, we find that currently in the context of COVID, the border closures that governments have implemented in order to stop human movement have meant that many of those that need to move anyway are forced to rely on the services of smugglers to cross these borders. And some of them will find themselves in contexts of exploitation that constitute trafficking.
Mohamed, what are the promises that are often made to those who perhaps are smuggled or even trafficked? But I think the distinction there is, as Lucia was mentioning, is that often if you're trafficked, you don't really give your consent.
It ranges, it varies from different things. First, you can be promised to go and work as a receptionist, let's say for a construction company, and then you find yourself working as a domestic worker. With or without a contract, that happens. Second, the terms that are on the contract, they can also be changed. For example, you can be told that you work for 8 hours and you end up working for 15 hours. Or you can be told that you're going to earn 2,000 Saudi Riyal and be placed in Jeddah, but you end up being placed in Dammam and earn 850 Saudi Riyals. So most of the time it's the contracts that vary. Some are actually moved without even being given contracts. And also exploitation in terms of indecent living and sleeping quarters, long working hours, being denied medical attention, and also facing threats and intimidations happen to workers who have been trafficked to some of these countries.
Is there a main reason why Kenya is the main getaway, Mohamed?
I think largely, first there are historical ties, and especially in the Kenyan coastal town between some of the Middle Eastern countries because of the history and the tradition that these two regions shared. Second, Kenya is an a headquarters or an air hub of the region per se. If we remove Addis, which is a country in the Horn of Africa, we are left with Nairobi mainly as the main air hub, followed by Kigali in Rwanda. Third is that most of the local employment agencies and also foreign employment agencies have found a foothold in Kenya, and they have established themselves, and they've been doing this business for quite some time. So they are able, using brokers in other countries, to actually recruit Burundians, Ugandans, and Rwandese, and to some extent also Tanzanians, all the way to Kenya, and then ferry them outside Kenya.
Lucia, are we doing any better at understanding how these rings operate and therefore increasing the chances of shutting them down?
The work is ongoing, including by researchers like myself and Mohamed, and we are starting to understand the criminal networks behind some of these dynamics better. However, unfortunately, particularly in the context of smuggling, we're often talking about a lot of different small, loosely affiliated organizations, which are incredibly difficult to track and interdict. And so the investigative work should be focusing on those networks that we know are operating in contexts that cause the greatest harm to migrants and refugees. There is simply not enough resources to focus on absolutely every network that is facilitating smuggling, and it is not a valuable use of resources. So we are understanding the markets better, but this should also help us focus our interdiction efforts on the areas which are most harmful.
Smuggling can't happen necessarily without including borders, and I'm wondering, Lucia, what is the role of countries and even officials at border posts when this trafficking or even smuggling happens? How involved are they or not involved?
There are two key ways in which the role of the state is really important in human smuggling dynamics. Firstly, the state decides its migration policies. And of course, where legal avenues for migration exist and are affordable and easy, there is no need to migrate irregularly, and there is no market for human smugglers. So the narrower that the legal avenues for migration become, the more important smugglers become and the more money they receive. Secondly, as you have alluded to, is the role of corruption, not just at border officials, but also in different roles, which is absolutely key to the smuggling economy. We very rarely see violence between smugglers and the state. It is really a state-enabled economy that relies on bribes.
Mohamed, let me bring you in here and perhaps get your final thoughts on this one. What has COVID-19 done to the state of those who have been smuggled or trafficked into different countries?
I think, Cathy, a pandemic that is catapulted by a disaster is simply catastrophic, especially to vulnerable communities. And I think Lebanon or Beirut is a perfect example of what has just happened. Most of the migrants were already laid off, or they were told to take unpaid leave by the employers for being carriers of the deadly coronavirus. But with the explosion that took place in Beirut, we have seen thousands of Kenyans protesting outside the Kenyan consulate. As we know, the Kenyan embassy in Kuwait oversees the consulate in Lebanon, but we see that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Kenya is saying that it is uniquely overstretched. So the embassy now is saying that it will need to actually look at the immigration and the documents of the workers who are outside there to ascertain that if they're really Kenyans, and this really shows that these workers were actually trafficked, because most of them have no documentation whatsoever. They were just ferried to those countries. They have no protection whatsoever. And then on top of that, they are told that they now need to come up with emergency travel certificates. They need to undergo COVID-19 testing. There's a repatriation flight that the Kenyan government says that it's looking into. But of course, as the case of the United Arab Emirates shows us that there were 300 distress calls by Kenyan workers in the United Arab Emirates, and only 13, that is 1-3, managed to board that flight because simply they could not raise the air ticket to come back to Kenya. And we can foresee a similar case that is going to take place also in Lebanon.
Lucia, what we're seeing many governments do, and I suppose part of it is also due to the internal pressure that they're facing from their own citizens, is focus a lot on the needs of citizens within certain borders, and often the rights of migrants, the rights of refugees and asylum seekers aren't necessarily put in the forefront. How can these people be better protected?
So firstly, although it's entirely understandable that in the context of a pandemic, countries turn inwards, ensuring that migrants of irregular or regular status are included in public health plans is absolutely crucial to the effectiveness of these public health plans. Otherwise, there are elements of the population within the country which are not being included and which therefore can't be tested and contact traced. Now, it's important that states consider the rights of these individuals, not only from the public health perspective, but also from a human rights perspective. The narrative emerging out of many states is very xenophobic. It's associating migrants with disease, and it's very concerning going forwards and looking to future trends that this starts to shape policy and legislation.
All right, Lucia Bird is the Senior Analyst at Global Initiative, and Mohamed Daghar, a researcher with ENACT Africa. Let me thank you both for your time on News at Prime tonight.